charges against Ghislaine Maxwell for helping Jeffrey Epstein sexually exploit and abuse multiple minor girls from the period of 1994 through 1997.
Outside a multi-million-dollar mansion in New Hampshire on Thursday, Ghislaine Maxwell, a British socialite and alleged enabler of Jeffrey Epstein, was arrested over allegations she helped the disgraced financier, her former boyfriend, identify and befriend and groom girls, including one as young as 14, when Epstein died last August as he awaited trial on sex trafficking charges in a Manhattan prison cell. Many women he was accused of abusing lost their chance at justice, and unanswered questions loomed over his far-reaching connections with the rich and powerful, including Prince Andrew, Donald Trump and Bill Clinton. Anne McElvoy knew Ghislaine in the 80s as a socialite with bulletproof confidence. Anne, is there now some hope we'll get some answers?
Ghislaine Maxwell is the most important figure in this saga, still alive, obviously apart from the young women who've been telling their stories, because what she will come under great pressure to do now that she is facing charges, and they're very serious charges, is that she will attempt to explain from her point of view how this situation arose and could continue for how many years. She will also, I think, come under considerable pressure from the prosecutors, and possibly also as part of a plea deal, to reveal other big names in this group. And she will explain, or at least be put on test to explain, what it was actually that she thought that she was doing, and is she going to make the argument that this was consensual? And if she isn't, how is that going to relate to the fact many of these young girls were underage, so could not give consent or informed consent anyway? She's an absolutely crucial person in getting us closer to the tangled truth.
You knew a different side of Ghislaine in the 80s. What was she like?
Ghislaine Maxwell was at Oxford the same time I was. She was a few years older, but just with courses and dates and times that you were there. She was a properly close friend of a late friend of mine, so I would see her around. She moved in quite elevated social circles. She was always, I think, in some ways older than her years, and kept the company of those older than her years. But that was partly because she was immensely wealthy. And being the daughter of Robert Maxwell, the newspaper proprietor, who was an extraordinary figure, a bulliant but also bullying figure, gave her pretty much one of the pole positions, I would say, in social life in Oxford and in London of that era.
She fled to New York after her father died. Why was that?
When her father was alive and their family home was in Headington Hall outside Oxford, this vast pile of a house where Robert Maxwell also conducted many of his professional operations, that was a place where Ghislaine Maxwell and her siblings could throw parties, they could entertain, but you always had the feeling it was on terms of her father, who could be a very controlling figure, and I think probably in some ways set her up for what has ensued in her life, although the decisions of her own. I think he saw Ghislaine's social life as an adjunct of his professional appeal, his reach, how important he was, and that idea, which is hard to recapture, of what it was to be in that circle of Robert Maxwell and his huge self-belief, but things had to be on his terms. After her father fell from his yacht, actually called the Lady Ghislaine, which gives you an idea of the centrality of Ghislaine in her father's very opulent life, she fled to New York. The family business was in great trouble. It was debt-laden. There had been double dealings. The whole thing collapsed like a pack of cards. And that was about the last time that I ever encountered Ghislaine Maxwell in London. I saw her really on and off in the room, often in social settings in New York. She was a relentless socialite, which is also how she could build up this network of formidable contacts, I'm sure we're going to hear about in any court case, and how she got close to Jeffrey Epstein. She certainly saw in him a way to relaunch her life. She tried various business ventures which didn't seem to go anywhere. And I think managing his life, his multiple properties, this extraordinary in and out of going to his private island and everything that he felt he needed to service that life became her job. And very much unfortunately, what then came with it were his rapacious sexual demands and his demands for young women, which she came to see as part of the job that was required of her, that she went along with, that she appears, at least is alleged, to have been very proactive in soliciting and encouraging. And the question for me is, how could someone who certainly needed to make a new life in New York, but how could you start from that position and end up on the low moral territory that she ended up operating in, while she still thought of herself as a sophisticated, friendly, outgoing person? That was the way she would still present herself, even a few years ago, as this storm cloud was breaking.
Yes, was there any outward sense that she was wrapped up in this other world with Jeffrey Epstein?
I think I first realised that something might be amiss when I was meeting people who knew Ghislaine Maxwell well. They were doing something and said, we're talking to each other along the lines of, do you think it's okay if Ghislaine comes? And being completely out of the loop and out of any gossip network about Jeffrey Epstein, other than you could see that he hung around with a lot of younger women, but there wasn't at that point any outright proof of anything untowards. I thought, what a funny way to put the question. Rather naively, I would have said, well, why not? People know her. She's had this group of people both sides of the Atlantic. So it would be very strange to say, well, why are you inviting this person? And we talked about our late friend that we had in common when she did actually show up to something. And she said he had died very tragically of a drug overdose and had been in all the papers. And she said, isn't it tragic? She'd had a good time with him. And she said, isn't it tragic how life plays out? And I think it was only later that I realised that she was at the beginning of the great unravelling of Jeffrey Epstein's criminal behaviour towards young women and her part in it. But no, it wasn't something that she gave any sign of. I don't cut Ghislaine Maxwell any slack. I know, and I have friends in the US who say she was controlled by Jeffrey Epstein, that she had little or no choice. But I know Ghislaine Maxwell was a highly intelligent, even at a young stage of life, quite an intellectual young woman. She was really capable of understanding every step of the way. And that is the awful story here. Of course, the real victims are these girls and women who were abused. The real victim is not Ghislaine Maxwell, but it's a fascinating and dark and perplexing saga, how someone could start life with every possible benefit, father on a pedestal, a bit of pressure, but certainly nothing like hardship many other people endure, and end up falling so very far.